Marvel's Luke Cage Season 2 on Netflix, better or worse than Season 1? What did you think? Let's talk about it in the comments. Welcome to Durbania, I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler talk for Marvel's Luke Cage Season 2 on Netflix. For me personally, I did like this season better than Season 1. It's been a long time since I watched Season 1. I only watched it one time because I just remember the feelings I had watching it. Like, the first half was really good, the second half kind of lost me. This one, I felt like it sped up, it slowed down, it sped up, it slowed down. It just kind of kept going back and forth like that. But as a whole, I liked it better than Season 1, and I actually enjoyed the way, like, it explored the character of Luke Cage, the angle it took, and as it got deeper into the character. So there was a lot of interesting things about Season 2 of Luke Cage. So, what did you think of Season 2? Let's talk about it in the comments. Let's right now dive into this review. I got my notes here so that hopefully I won't get lost. So if you see me do something like this, yeah, that's me trying to read my computer screen and scroll down and not be lost because it's 13 episodes and I'm just trying to keep track of all the stuff I'm talking about. So, diving into what I found most interesting about the show first. That's what I want to start off with, what I found the most interesting. And what was the most interesting to me about Season 2 was this incredibly strong Christian base that it had. Because it had a really strong faith base in regards to talking about bitterness and forgiveness, and how forgiveness is so freeing and bitterness is so poisoning. It poisons the soul, it poisons the mind, and over again, this show and its characters kept sending warnings to Luke Cage. You're getting darker, dude. You can't be taking this path. You are internalizing fear, you are internalizing anger, you are holding on to it, and it's messing with your identity.
The darkness that you deal with every day, it can consume you whole if you let it.
And I thought that was a really powerful message, and really powerful that they brought James Lucas into this, Luke Cage's father, who is a minister. So that was really interesting to bring him into this and have him be ministering and talking about God, diving into the Bible. Then you have Luke Cage, who's so angry and so bitter against his father and finds his father to be the biggest hypocrite in the world and can't let go of all of his father's sins against him from Season 1. And that bitterness, it's just growing. It's just this root getting deeper and deeper into his life. And so I thought that was really interesting. In this season, Luke talked about how to do what he does, he always has to be on edge. And so always being on edge like that changes a person. So he admits to the fact that he's changing, but he's having a hard time giving an honest look at himself and really honestly digging into what's changing him and how bad it's changing him. But then you have Claire, who recognizes this and is trying to tell him, I've seen these signs before. I grew up in a very angry house. You are succumbing to this, my friend. You are succumbing to this anger. And she points this out to him a whole bunch in the beginning. I mean, he's losing his temper on all kinds of things. And, you know, he kind of writes it off as righteous anger. He's doing the right thing. He really is taking that anger and he's using it as a crutch. And the show points out that he's saving people to run from himself. And, you know, sometimes when we try to do that self-examination and figure out what's really going on inside, it's like there's this little worm in us. And the moment we try to shine a light on it, whoo, it goes and runs and hides. And so we try to shine a light over there, whoo, it's gone again. And so that's kind of what's going on with Luke. You know, it's like he kind of knows there's something wrong, but he kind of doesn't want to explore it. Whenever he tries to shine a light on it, it runs and it hides. And that's what's going on in this season. And it's really interesting. And at the beginning of the season, it cost him Claire. The way he gets so angry at her for calling this out in him. The way he gets angry at her because she went behind his back to meet his dad. And she got some really excellent advice from his dad. Basically, you know, she's like, how do I save my boyfriend? Not saying Luke was her boyfriend. He's like, look, it's honorable that you want to save him and that you want to make him healthy again. But you know what you need to do? You need to get some perspective and get yourself healthy. Because if you're sick and if you're hanging on to this bad stuff, how are you going to help him let go of his bad stuff? How are you going to help him get healthier if you yourself aren't getting healthier? And so that's where she begins to realize she's going to have to remove herself from this environment. And when he loses his temper and he just slams that wall with his fist, man, she removes herself from that. And so she's got to take care of herself. So at the beginning of the season, it's her that walks out on Luke because his anger has so gotten the best of him. And you see it in that scene where he punches the wall and he sees the real fear in Claire's eyes. It's a sobering moment for him. And it's really a shame that it didn't really wake him up. It sort of did for about an episode or two, but as things progressed with Bushmaster, as things progressed with Mariah, just the anger and the frustration and the irritation and the lack of him dealing with the bitterness in his own life, it continues to make it worse and worse. So Claire pinpoints to him that what he's got to do is talk to his father, because to forgive his father and to talk with his father would release that poison. So I thought that was a really interesting spin and take, and what they kept bringing it back to was the idea of identity. I mean, you have the beginning of this movie where they're provoking Luke Cage and they're putting his name on the drugs they're selling. And then you have Mariah, who provokes Bushmaster, and so she makes a deal, and so now they start selling drugs with Bushmaster's name on it. And so, like, there's a couple points throughout this season where they really talk about your name, your reputation, and how important that is. When I'm looking at that, I mean, I know they're talking about reputation, but there's really a strong point where they're talking about identity, because Bushmaster will not call Mariah Mariah Dillard. He wants to call her by her name, Mariah Stokes, because it was the Stokes that murdered his family. It was the Stokes that stole his childhood from him, and he won't release her from that name in that identity. He wants vengeance against that name. And even when his uncle is saying your anger is driving you down a dark path, you need to turn from your anger. Vengeance is the Lord's. Again, even the Jamaicans here brought it back to the Lord and said, vengeance is the Lord's. Okay? They deserve all this bad stuff, but vengeance is the Lord's. It's not yours. And Bushmaster's like, well, he can have vengeance back when I'm done with it. I mean, it's showing this desire to not let go of bitterness and identity and how bitterness affects identity. I mean, in the end, Mariah drops the name Dillard and picks up the name Stokes almost proudly because she's just so tired of finally running from it. She just picks up that identity and takes it, and by the second half of the season becomes far worse than she was in the first half of the season because she chooses that identity. Bushmaster has had many times to walk away from his identity, but he picks up that vengeance, he picks up that anger, and decides his mother deserves to have her wrongs righted by him taking vengeance on the family that killed her. And so because he won't let that go, the bitterness is slowly poisoning him. And actually, you see that manifested with the whole plot line of Nightshade, which I find really interesting because Nightshade becomes like this heroin thing for him, that he needs to get more and more of it so that his body can heal itself and be strong and be almost bulletproof, and his muscles can be stronger and he can heal faster. And the more Nightshade he takes, the more he needs for his body to reach that point of strength. And so it's like heroin, and now his body begins to have this dependence on it. And the same thing is like happening to him in his soul with this bitterness. It's happening to Luke Cage with his soul and this bitterness. Now, I don't know how much you read into that with that, but that's what I so got out of that as I was watching this, and I thought that was so interesting. And so finally, Luke Cage is face to face with his father when they're in the Rand building, and they're hiding out in that Rand building. And it's interesting because James Lucas looks at his son and he says, magic and all this stuff. He goes, whatever. You know what the real magic is? What's really inside of you. When the pressure is on, what comes out of you, that's the real magic. That's what defines a man. It's what defines a hero. Because when the pressure is on, what's really inside is what's going to come up. And so I thought that was such an interesting plot line. Again, it goes back to identity, the importance of the name, the reputation. But I'm like, it goes beyond that. I really think the show was talking about identity. And so it was really interesting as the show dug into the importance of identity, the importance of the soul, the absolute poisoning effect that vengeance and bitterness has. Because as we get to know Bushmaster, we see it's like, gosh, he's such a victim. But he'd never let go of the victim mentality. He held on to the bitterness and the vengeance, and that, along with the Nightshade, absolutely poisoned him. We see Mariah, who so couldn't let go of the bitterness and the anger towards her family that in the end she became her family. Everything she hated in the Stokes, she took up that identity and became it. And then you have Luke Cage throughout this whole thing battling inside, light and dark, good and evil, but he had such a hard time letting go of his bitterness. Honestly, I thought when he was talking with his dad, the way that they talked, the way that they laughed, the good conversations that they had, I mean, it looked like they reached a point of forgiving one another. And so I thought, okay, this will be the turning point for Luke, where we're going to see Luke has let go of his bitterness, and now he's going to be that hero we know that he can be. And it really looked like he let go of the bitterness towards his father, but the bitterness and anger and frustration of what's going on between Mariah and Bushmaster and all the death and dismay and destruction that's going on, he just couldn't seem to release the bitterness, period. So even though he forgave his father, he still held on to his anger like a crutch, like it was something righteous, and continued to run from himself. I mean, they even brought Danny Rand into this, and his episode was freaking fantastic, and him even pointing out true power, it comes from stillness. You need to get still, and you need to balance what's going on inside. And Luke kind of laughed and scoffed this off, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And so all of that was so interesting for me to watch. The way it dug into this, the way it had that Christian foundation, the way it talked about forgiveness versus bitterness. I thought all of that was interesting. We see that with Misty Knight, man. She's got some great scenes in this. I mean, she's lost her arm, so she feels like she's lost a huge chunk of her identity. I mean, she's right-handed, and her right hand is gone. I'm a lefty, so that would suck for me to, So she's like struggling. I mean, she can't fight the same way. She can't even write on a piece of paper the same way. And she's struggling with her identity, struggling with the anger of losing her arm. But the point is, we still watch the identity she chooses. And it's that identity to uphold the law. It's that identity to release that bitterness. Like, she listens to Colleen and just kind of centers herself and lets that. So all of that to me is so interesting. And I really enjoyed that approach to the show, that approach to the characters. I enjoyed that Christian foundation that it had. It was just really, I can't decide if this is a positive or negative, the turn that it took, because Luke Cage, once Mariah was killed at the hands of her daughter Tilda, and she left the club to Luke, and Luke didn't burn the club to the ground, but instead he took the club because he thought he could rule the gangs that way and then bring peace to Harlem. And so by ruling the gangs, he would bring peace to the streets. Except multiple times in this show, they talked about, okay, you can't solve war with more war. You can't solve bloodshed with more bloodshed, because all it is more war and more bloodshed. So you can't settle evil with evil. And so even though Luke Cage is not trying to be evil, it felt symbolic at the end that when he took up the club, he was taking up that wrong identity, that his anger and his bitterness got the better of him. Even in the fact that Claire shows up at the club and we never see her, so that's kind of smart artistically. And Sugar comes up to Luke Cage and says, she's here. What would you like to do? And he says, send Claire out of here. Tell her to go home. So she leaves him in the beginning because of his anger and bitterness beginning to take him over, and then because of the choices he's made throughout the show, when she comes back to him seemingly, he sends her home. So it's interesting to see the journey of bitterness, and I feel like that's kind of where this was showing us the importance of identity, the importance of the identity we choose to pick up, and the importance of forgiveness being freeing and bitterness being poisoning. And so it was, to me, that was a really cool approach. At the very least, I just gotta say, that was my interpretation watching it. Like, I'm a Christian, so I'm watching it through that lens, and I'm watching the show. These are the plot lines that are really standing out to me, so I thought that was kind of smart. So, going down here through my notes, just a few more of my positives. I thought the action in the show was really great. Whenever they got into action sequences, I had so much fun with it. Luke Cage is a fun guy when he's fighting, especially at scene with him and Bushmaster, when they teamed up and Luke Cage is trying to stop Bushmaster from killing, Bushmaster's trying to kill, and even at one point Bushmaster hits Luke Cage with the axe, and it's like, come on, really? So like things like that were hilarious. So I don't know, I really enjoyed the action, like especially when Danny Rand was on the show. Oh my gosh, I really wish that he got more than one episode. because for once he wasn't whining and crying like a little girl, like a little baby. He was like a man. In fact, he was being a mentor to Luke and being somebody else telling Luke, let go of your anger and center yourself. So to see him be a bit more mature and have grown up a bit and have more control over this and not calling himself the immortal Iron Fist wherever he goes, like, it was cool seeing him like that. So then it made me want to see Danny Rand even more. And so, like, to have him in that episode where Luke Cage just hit my hand and he hits him with the glowy hand, the Iron Fist, and boom, that shockwave knocks all those guys down. Oh my gosh, I wanted more of that. That was good. So whenever they did the action, it was really, really good. It was also cool they brought Colleen on to help out Misty Knight. Like, her lines were really cool. The way they used Foggy in the show. So I thought that was really cool, the way they brought in the other characters and had them interact. And so I thought that was really cool. Bushmaster, I thought, was a really good villain. And again, like what they did with Thanos, where you understand Thanos, he's still evil, and everything Thanos is doing is evil, but you understand why he's doing it. I felt like they did a good job with that with Bushmaster. Through so much of what's going on, they did a good job showing you what a victim he is, a good job showing you that he's never let go of that victim mentality, and now he's out and about trying to do all these horrible, evil things. They did a good job, though, that you understand him, and you understand where he's coming from. But he's evil, and you want him to lose. So they did a good job with that. So I thought Bushmaster was a really good villain. I don't know how I felt about the way they closed out that story. It's not closed. You know he's going to come back. All of that is wide open. I guess a part of me wishes we just got a tad bit more closure than we got, but it wasn't that bad. Diving into some of my negatives, Mariah and Shades is just at the top of that list. They're both so weird. Just weird. And not even in that entertaining way. There were parts where I thought the actress playing Mariah was overreacting to things and overacting things, and she was just so weird. Shades is just creepy, and their weird love affair thing going on was just creepy. It's seriously, like, when he smiles, it bothers me. It's like this. It's like, I can't do it, because I don't think I'm a creepy person. But it was just really creepy, and I don't know. That whole thing, it just bothered me. It got better towards the end, especially when Mariah just decided she was a Stokes and just was really evil, and then Shades turned on her. That made things better. But as a whole, I don't know. I don't even like that dynamic. It was just too weird. And then for me, I thought the show was really slow to start, and then it really picked up in the middle. Then it got super slow. I mean, right when things were picking up, it just dropped slow, and then it picked up again. So I felt like the pacing overall throughout, and the flow of the season was a little awkward. And I was just mixed on the ending. I liked it, showing the true path of bitterness, and Mariah just kind of, evil knows evil, so she recognized the temptation in Luke, and so that's why in her final written will, she left the club to him, because she knew that it would change him, that instead of him and his goal to use it to change the city, it would change him. That's just seriously what the devil does. And so she kind of reminded me of the devil there in that last moment. I also hated it when she was dying in Luke Cage's arm, though, and Luke Cage looked at her and he's like, does it hurt? She goes, it burns. And he's like, good. I hated that. I just did not like that. I understand we're seeing the illustration of this bitterness, and that after all, it's still kind of taking him over, but I don't know. Also kind of an interesting parallel. Mariah loves Harlem and he loves Harlem. But I don't know. It was just that was weird to me. So I don't know. I still want my heroes to be the heroes, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting to explore this. I guess really it depends on where we go with Luke from here. He's a good guy, so he's going to be a good guy, but it's how we get him to learn and be humbled and actually release this bitterness that is making him think that he can use this club to change Harlem, but in reality, the club is going to be what changes him. So I hope before he goes down that dark side and Misty has to come in there and beat him up with her robot arm and arrest him, I really hope we get some really cool moments where he changes his ways. Maybe Defender Season 2 will see that happen. I don't know. But I guess it kind of just depends on how we redeem this character and get him to walk back up the light path rather than staying kind of on this dark path. Same time, artistically, it is kind of interesting the path that they took with this. So, I don't know. Kind of just depends for me. I think overall, I'm going to give this season... I'm teetering between B- and C+. but I'm going to give it a B- because I really do think that it kept me entertained. There were long moments of this show where it was just characters talking and I was done, man. I didn't want to hear their conversation. I didn't care how important it was to the story or how important it was to character development. It was just so boring. I wanted it to end. But when they got to the good stuff, man, like Danny Rand and Luke Cage fighting bad guys together, like, it was done well, and I was highly entertained. So that's kind of where my mixed feelings come. So overall, I do think this season was pretty average to me. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it wasn't anything bad. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a B-. What did you think of Season 2? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian. And hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for the next movie review I do, ranking video I drop, theological analysis, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.